The Massachusetts International Festival of the Arts Victory Players are back this summer with another installment of their popular El Puerto Rico series. El Puerto Rico IV will feature 9 new compositions from Puerto Rican composers, and I spoke with the music director of the Victory Players to hear more about this new installment and what the future holds for the series.
We wanted firstly to celebrate our wonderful Puerto Rico community here in Holyoke, and which is where we are based at the Victory Theater, as you said, sponsored by the Massachusetts International Festival of the Arts. And you know, we thought about various different titles, and we landed on the original meaning of the word Puerto Rico, which is the rich port. And I think, you know, this is something that, you know, a lot of people don't realize about that. You know, Puerto Rico is in some ways some of the oldest parts and the oldest music in America is in Puerto Rico, and it has a, you know, half a millennium long musical history and really rich musical heritage culture, and we wanted to celebrate that. So we thought, what better way to do that than to approach composers with an interest in Puerto Rico, either from Puerto Rico or somebody who has engaged with Puerto Rico in the past, to write pieces about that. And what we have now is 10 new pieces by 9 different composers, with all of them very different styles and very different takes. And what a way to exemplify the word rich, and a port of call with all of these different ideas coming together to meet in Puerto Rico.
So as you mentioned, El Puerto Rico IV will feature new compositions by these Puerto Rican composers. Walk me through the creative process and what it's like bringing all these composers and musicians together from all these different backgrounds in the same space.
I have to say it's super exciting. First of all, I think, you know, with the composers, it's really an exploration. We start with meeting and talking about, you know, their vision of what they want to say, and you know, I think for a lot of our composers of Puerto Rican descent, there was also the question of the identity, you know, as a Puerto Rican, as an American, and, you know, what that means, and how am I going to say that through music. And so for some of them, it was very, very personal. So Cristian Quiñones, for example, wrote a piece that was called What My Mother Wrote. And he realized, you know, he is Puerto Rican. And it's essentially what he does is by default Puerto Rican music. And he wanted to say something a little bit more than that. He wanted to talk about his relationship with his mother, which is something that's very universal. And the music very naturally was infused with all these wonderful rhythms of bomba and plena, just kind of ever so slightly in the background. And there's one piece this year that we're super excited about, and it's by J.J. Peña Aguayo, and it's called Prince of Lost Breath. And it is inspired by the demonstrations in Loíza in Puerto Rico in response to the death of George Floyd. And instead of focusing on the darkness that, you know, that incident represented, he focused instead on the global a response to kind of structural racism and kind of and the anti-racist movement, if you will, and the music therefore celebrates that. But it's so special because we got to work with a local group, Bomba Daqui, which is based right here in Springfield and Holyoke, and they do a lot of work in Western Massachusetts public schools. And here we are, classical contemporary ensemble meeting this wonderful bomba band and dancer, and we're learning all these things about the culture, and the music just makes so much sense together, and it's so exciting.
So the composers arrived this weekend, and now you are all together working on these pieces for El Puerto Rico IV. How has this past week been going for you so far?
You know, we just came out of a pandemic, and I think that's the most obvious thing. And it took a lot of doing to get everybody here. So I think the first response was like just sheer joy. I think, you know, I was near tears when I heard the sound of the instruments together. I mean, it's just such a precious thing. And I think for musicians and also the composers, for many of us, it's been 15 to 16 months of no human contact. And music is so direct, it's so emotionally connected. And, you know, just the idea that, you know, I'm watching the dancer move and I'm playing some sound that reflects that is magic.
The first 2 iterations of El Puerto Rico included musical workshops with the Victory Players within schools in the area. How has the pandemic affected that aspect of the program, and what have you had to do differently?
Every single school had slightly different responses. I think their classroom schedules were slightly different, the buildings were slightly different. But I think the most difficult thing is that the timetable was moving constantly. I think that's the experience of everybody. During this pandemic, everything keeps changing. You do the same job 7 times, and then at the last minute, you do it an 8th time. I think that's been the hardest thing here. So normally we would go to the schools and we would contact the teachers and say, okay, so we're going to come the first week of June, and we're going to, meet with our students and so on. And I don't think anybody could have actually told us that we could meet with them in person and what the protocols were going to be in February when we were planning all of this. So what we've done instead is that this time round, we're taking JJ's piece, Prince of Loth's Breath, and we're actually recording it in a studio. And then we're working with JJ and Bombadaki, and we will actually be creating programs for elementary school, middle school, and high school. And they will now all be in a package that's going to be online that the teachers can actually access at any time that they'd like.
The first time that you experiment a little bit with a virtual event was earlier this year when El Puerto Rico III had to go virtual due to the restrictions of the pandemic. What were some of the challenges and also positive insights that you learned with having to reimagine this series?
When we commissioned the pieces, Zoom was not certainly a major factor in our decisions. And so composers made decisions about instruments and so on that don't record well on Zoom, for example, or don't interact very well on Zoom. And then there's for musicians, I think the biggest trouble is this thing called lag. So, by the time I play a sound and it goes to the Zoom server and back to you, Zydalis, it's already delayed. And by the time it comes back to me, it's further delayed, it's doubly delayed. And so we can actually perform as if we are sitting next to each other. And so we have to pre-record some things. And so what we had to very, very quickly do, and we're so grateful to our wonderful artists and composers that they are being so flexible and so kind to us. We met a whole group of composers with Puerto Rican heritage back in October, and we said, okay, look, we can't actually perform normally. Can you write us pieces that's going to actually be playable through Zoom and that we can actually record? So that was one big thing. We sat down together and explored what were the technical difficulties there and created pieces that facilitated good performances with that. And then we actually reduced everything so it was just 2 people. So theoretically, it would be possible for somebody to play something on the background on their computers and then actually just perform live.
Hard to believe for all of us, but we are now entering a post-pandemic new normal. What does that mean for the El Puerto Rico series? What will be unveiled in the future of this program?
We are hoping that we're going to be doing video and sound recordings, and coming out of that, we'll be able to make a variety of things from them, whether it's podcasts, a radio show, a spot feature, and actually appearing in somebody else's music show, for example. But also like a little mini series with videos and interviews with the composers that is going to live on WGBH's website as well as the MIFA and NEPM websites. And that's kind of cool because, I think one of the, if you will, side projects of that is like, this, what we say in new music and new classical music, it's like who's afraid of classical music? Well, nobody. This is like there's dancing, there's playing, there's bomba. It's just so exciting, and I think, people relax into it, and the various formats that we're talking about actually allow people to get kind of up close and personal with us, to see and to hear, and we hope to actually do a little live component at some point where we actually can interact with the audience at large. So I think that's very exciting for the El Puerto Rico project.